It began in the sort of setting most people take for granted, an everyday moment dressed in ordinary clothes, where the difference between walking away with nothing or walking away with everything rests on a single turn of phrase. I had learned long ago that negotiation was less about words and more about rhythm, a dance between silence and pressure, between patience and persuasion. People often mistake it for aggression, thinking that to win you must hammer, corner, or dominate. But the real secret, the classic cheat, was far quieter. You win by convincing the other person they've won too. The first time I realized this was at a street market, the kind where colors and sounds crash into each other and bargaining is as natural as breathing. A vendor held up a watch, its shine catching the sunlight in a way that made me stop. He threw out a number that could have paid for lunch, dinner, and perhaps a bed for the night. I didn't argue. I didn't protest. Instead, I simply looked at the watch with the face of someone who might walk away. Silence is unbearable when money hangs in the air, and he filled it quickly with a lower price. Still, I said nothing. I let the weight of that pause do the work until he finally leaned forward, exhaled, and named the figure I had in mind from the start. It was then I knew that negotiation wasn't a battle. It was theater. Every gesture, every pause, every flicker of doubt you allow them to see, it all plays into a story where they are as much the actor as you are. Later in life, when the stage grew larger and the stakes sharper, the same cheat applied. I sat across from employers, potential partners, even rivals. Some came armored with numbers and contracts, others with ego and pride. But they all wanted one thing: to feel that they weren't giving in. Once, in a boardroom heavy with the smell of polished wood and cold ambition, a man twice my age leaned across the table and told me flatly that my proposal was impossible. He expected me to defend it, to attack his doubts with facts and force. I didn't. I nodded, as if conceding, then quietly reframed the very edges of the deal, shifting his attention from what he would lose to what he might gain. The trick was never to shove a person into agreement, but to lead them so gently that when they arrived at the destination, they believed they had chosen the path themselves. By the time he signed, he wore the satisfied grin of a man who thought he had outsmarted me, while the numbers on the page sang a different story. But negotiation isn't only about money or contracts. It slips into every conversation where desire and resistance meet. A landlord raising rent, a mechanic naming a price, a friend hesitant to help. Every human interaction holds the faint outline of a bargain waiting to be struck. I found that the cheat worked best not when I pursued what I wanted with teeth bared, but when I listened so carefully that the other side revealed exactly what they feared most and what they hungered for. Often, their fears were louder than their wants. If you quieted the fear, you almost always won the deal. Over time, the game became second nature. I could feel when silence would squeeze more than 1,000 arguments. I knew when a well-timed compliment could disarm suspicion, when humor could soften a hardened stance, when walking away was the strongest move of all. The true cheat, I learned, wasn't manipulation, it was discipline. The discipline to hold back when every impulse screamed to speak, the discipline to wait for the other person to tip their hand, the discipline to make the victory look like theirs. Looking back, I can trace every turning point in my life to a moment of negotiation. Jobs secured, debts reduced, friendships mended, opportunities opened, all hinged on the same rhythm I first discovered in that noisy market with a watch glinting in the sun. People say winning negotiations takes cunning, strength, or even luck. But I know the truth. It takes patience, silence, and the steady hand to let others believe they hold the reins, even as you guide the horse. That is the classic cheat, the hidden key, to win by never appearing to fight at all. The lesson sharpened with each encounter, but the one that burned itself most deeply into my memory took place in a cramped office at the edge of the city, where the walls were stained with time and the air carried the faint smell of paper and stale coffee. I had come to negotiate terms for a contract that, if won, would change the entire course of my career. The man across the desk was a veteran, the sort who had spent decades sharpening his tongue into a blade. He knew every trick, or so he thought, and wore the confident smile of someone who believed no one could outmaneuver him. He began by setting the rules of the conversation. His voice was clipped, deliberate, and carried the kind of authority that tried to stamp out resistance before it could even form. He leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and let the silence sit as if daring me to blink first. In that silence, most would have rushed to fill the void, to defend their position, to prove themselves. I did not. I let the moment stretch, heavy and uncomfortable, until he shifted, his certainty thinning ever so slightly. When I finally spoke, it wasn't to argue. It was to ask him about his concerns, about what he needed most from this deal, as though the power belonged entirely to him. People reveal their soft spots when they feel heard, and he was no exception. He confessed that deadlines worried him, that trust was his rarest currency, that cost mattered less than reliability. That was all I needed. I rewove my proposal with those words, feeding them back to him, as though they had been mine all along. By the end of the hour, the contract was not only mine, it was signed under terms more favorable than I had dared to hope. He shook my hand firmly, convinced he had bet me to his will, unaware that it was his own words that had bound him. Not every negotiation came dressed in formality. Some slipped into the everyday, testing whether I could wield the cheat without titles, papers, or contracts. Once a landlord tried to raise my rent by more than I could afford. I did not fight him with anger. Instead, I painted him a picture of my loyalty as a tenant, the ease of having someone who paid on time, the risk of losing months of income searching for another. I let him believe that lowering the increase was his clever compromise, a demonstration of his fairness. When I walked away, the rent was nearly unchanged, and he was smiling at his own generosity. Even in friendships, the rhythm played out. A close companion once refused to join me on a trip I longed to take. She listed excuses, time, cost, responsibilities. I did not push back. Instead, I spoke of how much I valued her company, how different the journey would feel without her, and then I let silence settle between us like a soft weight. Days later, she called, saying she had rearranged everything and would come. She believed it was her decision, a gift she had chosen to give. Perhaps it was. But I knew the quiet had guided her. And yet, beneath all the victories, I learned the most dangerous temptation of the cheat: arrogance. To use it carelessly, to treat every exchange as a contest, is to poison relationships. The art of winning is not in conquering, but in shaping outcomes so gently that harmony remains. The greatest negotiators are invisible, their fingerprints never show. I began to treasure not only the deals I won, but the bridges I never burned in the process. Years later, at a banquet lit by chandeliers and filled with the chatter of powerful men and women, I overheard two voices discussing me at a nearby table. One said I was shrewd, the other that I was easy to work with. I smiled into my glass of wine, because both were true, and neither realized how carefully I had cultivated that illusion. So the cheat endures, simple and timeless. Never fight the battle head-on. Let the silence pull, let the other voice reveal its fears, let them feel the glow of victory while you quietly pocket your own. The world runs on deals, both spoken and unspoken, and if you can master the rhythm, there is nothing you cannot negotiate and win. The art first seemed like a trick, something small and playful, like haggling for fruit in a bazaar. But as the years unfolded, it became the hidden current guiding my life. Each stage, each encounter, revealed a new layer of the cheat. There was the time I negotiated for my first real job. I was young, untested, and sitting across from a manager who had mastered the tone of indifference. He listed the salary like a number carved in stone, then waited for my acceptance. My heart raced, but I remembered the lessons. Never meet silence with desperation. Instead, I leaned back as if considering, as though my options stretched wider than he imagined. "That's interesting," I murmured, sliding the words like a coin across the table. "But for someone expected to carry the responsibilities you've outlined, it feels a little light." I said nothing more. He cleared his throat. His pen tapped once, twice. Then he shifted, his voice softening. "What number did you have in mind?" I had no leverage, no experience worth mentioning, but in that instant, I had turned the table. I gave him a figure just higher than what I truly wanted, and after a show of reluctance, he agreed. I walked out trembling with victory, not only for the money but for the proof that silence and patience could bend the course of a future. Another time, I found myself in a negotiation that had nothing to do with money. My younger brother wanted to quit school, convinced it was pointless. He braced for argument, for lectures, for the blunt weight of persuasion. But I gave him none. Instead, I asked him what he wanted from life, what freedom looked like to him, what success felt like. He spoke for hours, pouring out frustrations and dreams, until the fight drained from him. When I finally spoke, I simply pointed out that finishing school might give him more of the freedom he craved, not less. He nodded slowly, as though it had been his idea all along. He finished his degree, and years later thanked me, never realizing how carefully I had led him. The stakes grew sharper as I entered business. One deal in particular nearly slipped away. A group of investors, men whose watches cost more than my car, sat across from me with faces that gave nothing away. They wanted control, more than I could allow, and pushed relentlessly for it. The room was thick with tension. I let them argue, let them feel their power, and at the moment they expected me to concede, I stood and began gathering my papers. "What are you doing?" one of them asked, frowning. "I appreciate your time," I said evenly, "but I can't sign away control. If that's your line, then we're done here." The silence that followed was a living thing, heavy and suffocating. Walking away was the hardest move I had ever made, because everything in me screamed to stay, to fight, to cling to the deal. But I knew the rule. When you can afford to walk, you hold the power. Before I reached the door, their voices called me back. The contract that followed was not only signed, but bent toward my terms. They believed they had rescued the deal from collapse. I knew I had forced them into the very space where compromise blooms. But the cheat was not invincible. I learned that in a failed negotiation that still stings. I had pressed too hard, misjudged the other man's pride. I thought silence would draw him forward, but it only hardened his stance. He saw through the rhythm, saw the dance, and rather than feeling victorious, he felt manipulated. He ended the meeting abruptly, and the deal collapsed. It taught me the humbling truth. A cheat, no matter how classic, is not a weapon but a tool. Misused, it cuts both ways. Years later, when I taught my own team how to close deals, I never gave them formulas or scripts. Instead, I told them stories. I told them about the watch in the market, the landlord with the rent, the job interview, the boardroom walkout, the brother who almost quit school. I told them the heart of negotiation was not cleverness, but empathy cloaked in patience. People will always fight being conquered, I said, but they rarely fight their own reflection. Show them what they want to see, and they'll give you everything. And now, looking back across the trail of agreements, contracts, and quiet victories, I can see the thread that ties them all. The classic cheat was never about trickery. It was about restraint, about knowing when to speak and when to let the silence speak louder, about guiding without pushing, listening until the truth revealed itself, and leaving every room with the other side convinced they had outwitted me. That was the secret I carried, the one I now pass on. To negotiate anything and win, never fight to be the loudest, the smartest, or the strongest. Let them walk away smiling, believing they triumphed. Only you need to know the truth, that you walked away with exactly what you came for.